みやだんです。今日はみやだんのお気に入りの本を英語で読んでみます。I'm gonna read my favorite book. The title is Tim and Lucy Go to Sea. Lucy Brown was a dear little girl, 7 years old. She lived with an old friend named Mr. Grimes in his beautiful house in the country. She was very happy, but she sometimes wished she had another child to play with. Now one day, as she was sitting on the garden wall, thinking and thinking, whom should she see tracking along the road but a small boy of about her age. He was carrying a bundle and a stick. "Hello, boy," she said. "Where are you going, and what is your name?" "My name is Tim," answered the boy. "I am a sailor, and I have been shipwrecked. I'm now looking for another ship." Lucy was excited. Then she had an idea. "Come and see my guardian, Mr. Grimes," she said. "Perhaps he will buy a steam yacht and then we can all go to sea." Mr. Grimes was delighted with the idea and asked Lucy to ring the bell for Mrs. Molly, his housekeeper, so that he could speak to her about it. At last, Mrs. Molly did not like the idea a bit. She said no, she was sure they would all be drowned, and anyway, the sea always made her sick. "Stuff and nonsense," said Mr. Grimes. "Order the car. We will go and look for a yacht at once." Tim said that he knew of a steam yacht called Evangeline, which was at sale at Portsmouth. When they arrived at the harbor, they all got into a small boat, and Tim, with great skill, rowed them out to the yacht. It was a beautiful yacht with a black hull, golden figurehead, red fennel, and yellow cabins on the deck. Soon, Tim had brought them alongside. Lucy was first up the gangway, while Tim, like a proper boatman, stayed behind to help Mr. Grimes and Mrs. Molly disembark. Mr. Grimes was delighted with the yacht and said he would buy it. Mrs. Molly only sniffed, but you can imagine how excited Lucy was. Tim was pleased and to Mr. Grimes that he knew of a very good captain and a very good cook. "Good," said Mr. Grimes sent them a telegram. Oh, and by the way, tell the captain to bring some sailors with him. Tim went out and sent a telegram to the captain, who was no other than the captain of the ship in which Tim had run away to sea. He also sent a telegram to the cook, who had also been on the ship and was a family man. The next thing Mr. Grimes did was to buy a lot of dark blue jerseys with S.Y. Evangeline printed on them for the crew. He also brought 2 small ones for Tim and Lucy. They were very proud of them. The next day, the crew arrived on board the Evangeline. Tim was pleased to meet the captain again and introduced him to Mr. Grimes. They both liked each other at once. Tim then introduced his old friend the cook to Lucy, and then all 3 went below to look at the galley. The cook thought it was the best galley he had ever seen. That afternoon, Tim and Lucy and the crew went for a walk in the town, partly to have a look, but chiefly to show off their beautiful new jerseys. For the next few days, they were all busy getting ready for the Evangeline for sea. There was decks to be scrubbed, paintings to be done, and provisions to be put on board. Tim and Lucy helped with the painting. They enjoyed doing it very much and became very good at it and did not get any paint on their clothes. Mr. Grimes heard about making suggestions, and the captain was busiest of all, making sure that everything was done properly. Mrs. Molly worked hard too, but she was sad when Mr. Grimes asked her how she was enjoying herself. She said, "I know how to do my duties, sir. It is not for me to complain." All the work was done at last to the captain's scene, and he reposed to Mr. Grimes that the ship was ready to sail on the morning tide. How excited they all were. Mr. Grimes indeed had a confrontation with the captain, and Tim and Lucy, who were listening at the door, heard such words as Portugal, then the Azores. How about popping over to Pernambuco? And so on. Every flag had a smile on it except one, and that was Mrs. Molly. She looked proud as she stared at the shore. It was a lovely day when the Evangeline, looking very smart in her new coat of paint, and with all her flags flying, steamed out of the harbor for the open sea. Tim and Lucy and Mr. Grimes were on deck, but Mrs. Molly went straight below and put herself to bed. This was the beginning of many happy days. Lucy loved the life at sea, especially as she had Tim there to tell her about everything. Also, she made great friends with the second mate and used to tidy his cabin and darn his socks. This pleased him very much, as he was a bachelor and very untidy. After Tim and Lucy would go to the galley, if the cook was busy, they would help him with the cooking. But if he was free, he would sit and tell them wonderful stories of his life at sea. Mr. Grimes was helping too, but Mrs. Molly became sadder and sadder and more sick, until Mr. Grimes felt he had been comfortable to make her come to sea with him. At last, Mr. Grimes decided for Mrs. Molly's stake to turn back and make for home, especially as the sea was getting rather rough. Then an adventure happened which made a great difference to all of them. By now, it was blowing a gale and the sea was very rough. Tim was on the bridge with the captain when he saw bobbing about the great waves a raft with some man on it. Tim, said the captain, we must rescue them. Call the second mate. Tell him to get a boat's crew. Telling that and other all hands on deck to lower our boat. With great difference, they managed to get a boat away. In the moment, Mrs. Molly, hearing all the noise, had hurried on deck. At last, going to the grate of the crew all the men on the raft were saved, but they were a villainous-looking lot, and the captain said he would be glad when they were put ashore. Mrs. Molly, who was watching the rescue, felt sure something terrible would happen, and something terrible nearly happened. A day or two, Tim and Lucy were going into the storeroom when they heard the rescued man plotting to capture the ship. "Oh, what shall we do?" said Lucy. "Hush," whispered Tim. "I have an idea," he called forward, slammed the door and bolted it. Then Tim and Lucy ran as fast as they could to the captain. "Quickly," said the captain, "to the forward hatch. They would try and escape that way." But Mrs. Molly was on deck. She had heard the terrible shouts of the mutineers when they had found them locked in, and was horrified to see the hatch covers slowly open and a head appear. With great presence of mind, she slammed down the hatch cover and sat on it. In a moment, but just in time, Tim and Lucy and the captain were here to help her hold it down. The door and the hatch cover have been secured by the clue, and Captain said that as the mutineers were desperate characters, all men on deck must take it in turns to watch over them. Mr. Grimes said that he had once been a very good shot and intended on taking his turns with the others. Tim shared the night watch with the cook. Mrs. Molly and Lucy busied themselves cooking food and bringing tea for the crew when they come off watch. Mrs. Molly was too excited and too busy to feel sick. At last, a warship was sighted. It had come in to the captain's SOS. All the crew gave a cheer when they heard the news. Soon the warship was alongside. A party of neighborhood come aboard the Evangeline and let them off in chain. The captain of the warship congratulated Tim and Lucy and Mrs. Molly on their bravery and presence of mind. "Now," said Mr. Grimes, thinking again of poor Mrs. Molly, "perhaps it is time we all went home." "Oh, yes, please. Don't go home for my steak. I like the sea now and don't feel sick anymore. Bravo, said Mr. Grimes. Tim, said Mr. Grimes, run and tell the captain to make for the open sea. The end. チャンネル登録お願いね。見てくれてありがとう。